welcome to College of Arts and Science. My name is Chris Sirma. I'm the Dean of the College of Letters and Science. It's funny, I was just talking to Tom and I told him how wonderful Lee Willis lecture was last month. And he said to me, you're supposed to tell me that after. So no pressure, Tom. But anyway, I wanted to welcome everyone to this wonderful outreach opportunity that we take part in. Try to do it about once a month. I want to invite you to our next lecture series, which, if you'll allow me to put my glasses on for just a second, because it's in like 2-point font. Our next lecture series is, our next lecture will be November 11th, and that will be Chris Hartlib out of the biology department. And he'll be talking about the Blue Revolution, farming water to grow food. And he's going to be talking a lot about aquaponics and aquaculture. So we'll be looking at the sciences part of our college. Anyway, the format for these lectures is normally that we have the lecturer speak for about 45 minutes or so, and then there's about 15 minutes of open questions which the speaker can moderate. I will usually then step up and adjourn the seminar, and then you can come up and speak to the lecturer on your own. Tonight's lecturer is Dr. Thomas Leek out of our World Languages and Literature department. I'm looking at Alec because Alec was instrumental in changing the name of the department from Foreign Languages to World Languages and Literature, and I think it's much more reflective of what they do. Anyway, foreign languages just sounds humdrum. Everyone has foreign languages, but not everyone has a World Languages and Literatures department. So having said that, Tom Leek is our special guest tonight. Tom got his BA from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and correct me if I've got any of this wrong, Tom. His master's from the University of Minnesota in the Department of German, Scandinavian, and Dutch Studies, I assume, which is pretty close to that. And he got his PhD from the University of Minnesota from the same department, correct, Tom?
Yes.
Yes. He is currently assistant professor at UW-Stevens Point in our WLL program. Also, Tom teaches courses in, I want to get these right, beginning German language, intermediate German language, German culture, German literature, first-year seminar, which he has focused on the Brothers Grimm and folklore, so it's appropriate to tonight's lecture. And finally, he does online Latin courses for us, which I've been tempted to take myself with all of that free time that I have as dean. And Tom's trying to get me to take his courses as well. Very special lecture by Tom because he piqued my interest about 2 years ago. I think he did a faculty forum a couple of years back, and I just found his topic absolutely wonderful. So I want you to help me welcome Dr. Thomas Leek and his topic tonight, just so that I get it right. I want to be sure that I get this correct. Inventing an Ancient Past, the Brothers Grimm and Romantic Philology. Tom Leek.
And the nice thing about 2 years ago, this is a different talk. It's not just recycled. But what I meant to say is that 2 years ago, the nice thing about it was that it was the 200-year anniversary of the publication of the first volume of the first edition of the Children and the Household Tales. And at the time, critics who looked at the book, I guess the first thing I should say is that the book did not sell well. It was, and what the problems that critics pointed to, I'll get into more detail on that a little bit later, but the main problem is a problem that we still have with the book today. Namely, I mean, what's this for? Is it, at the time it was a question, is this for kids? Well, okay, the book was called Children's and Household Tales, so okay, it's for kids, I guess. Or is it, is this scholarship? Is this supposed to be history? Is this, what is this book I hold in my hands? And am I supposed to be reading this, or is this for somebody else? And when I say, an invented past, I don't mean to say that the Grimms just made stuff up. But, there are some kind of thorny problems with how they presented what they were doing. But I'm going to start with something that I actually intended to put at the end. And it's only something that came to me a couple of days ago, because I listened to a number of podcasts. for which well, anyway. I listen to a number of podcasts, and I heard this advertisement, and I don't want to, okay, I've never watched Game of Thrones. I never have. And I don't know anything about it, but I think I'm going to have to go over here. Is this working? Oh, it's off. So, humanities. Yeah, okay, I think I have to click the link here. But it's, I heard this online spot, and it's about an invented language. So invented language, invented past. Hopefully, we'll see the connection here. Am I supposed to double click? No. And, oh God, okay. Oh no, I just click accept and we should be okay, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I really do accept. Okay, good. Okay, so now I bet I have to go back to the PowerPoint. This one here, yeah, and click again probably. Okay. It's not so, I had to record it as sort of not a YouTube video, but something similar. So what you're seeing doesn't matter. I hope we get volume on this actually. Do we? I forgot to check that. Oh, no, it's muted here, sorry. Whose laptop is this? How do we unmute? Okay, it's not, oh wait, there we go.
Here's something you might not know. All the languages that they invented for that show are based on like real.
Well, okay, you can't really hear it. So, or can we all hear the speakers from here?
Sort of.
Nah, okay, I'll just tell you. It's an advertisement. It's an advertisement for, I better go back to the PowerPoint. It's an advertisement for learning an invented language from this show Game of Thrones. Dothraki, I think, is what it's called. And again, I don't know what that's about because I've never seen the show. But this language struck me because this is such a weird thing. Like, why would anyone bother to study an invented language like that? But again, I don't want to offend anyone into the show at whatever level, but it kind of struck me as nuts that someone would not just spend time on this, but put down some good money to learn Dothraki. So, invented languages and linguistic experimentation, they have kind of a long history, right? Just like folklore does. And it's probably difficult, historically speaking, to separate sort of secret code languages, mystical languages invented for religious purposes, etc., from other types of invented languages. And, the reason there is such a thing as, say, modern German isn't necessarily so dissimilar as to why someone sat down and invented Esperanto, but that's, in recent history at least, this idea of a fictional language like Dothraki, it's really something that I think has its roots in Tolkien. And again, this connection between Grimm's and the Tolkien, this comparison, I'll flesh this out for you. So I heard this advertisement. I decided to make the tie-in just a few days ago. So, but I think Tolkien invented languages mainly as a way, and maybe Mary can actually say more about this, mainly as sort of an artistic integrity kind of thing, right? I don't think he expected anyone to sit down to have like some sort of subculture that will sit around and learn Dwarvish or Elven, even though those do exist, and the same thing goes for Klingon. And you can read Hamlet in Klingon if that's how you choose to spend your time. But and I think by the time Klingon came around, there was maybe already an idea of sort of nerd subcultures, right? But with Game of Thrones, of course, the comparison I want to make here is that why would anyone do this? The idea I'd like to put forward tonight is that what goes on with people, putting money down to learn Dothraki is sort of a modern subculture, market economy variation on what the Brothers Grimm were trying to do with the folktale collection that they published. And not just folktales, by the way, but in a way their entire intellectual life was about creating not like a subculture around a particular, obviously not a TV show, but a historically based, more or less united culture for Germany, which at the time, of course, did not exist. And in fact, when they started off, was under the thumb of, well, Napoleon was doing his thing at the time. So in Germany, all over Germany. So So the problem with, the problems that we get with the Grimms is a question of authenticity. Like, nobody cares that Dothraki isn't quote unquote real, right? Just like nobody cares that Klingon is real or not real. And, okay, when it comes to other invented languages, when we say C+ or Python or C#, other computer languages, we don't really care if they're, quote unquote real either. It's a matter of function, right? And it's the same thing with Dothraki or other invented languages. It's about their function, right? That's why people put money down to learn this stuff and spend time on it. Though with an invented language, the function is social, it's artistic, and maybe even commercial within the context of the entertainment industrial complex. And as I hinted above, there's a similar argument to be made that modern standard German, English too in a way, though it's maybe a little more problematic with English, but that modern standard German isn't real either. It's mostly based on a set of dialects spoken sort of in the middle belt of Germany, Frankfurt to maybe Leipzig. But at some point in the over the period of the 19th and 20th centuries, the Germans had these conferences deciding what is good German. And of course, good German at that point didn't exist. It was people just sitting down deciding what's appropriate for business German, what's appropriate for academic German, and that's what German children learn in school, not at home. No, not necessarily at home. And nobody cares that originally nobody actually spoke German the way they speak it today. Again, it's about function. But then do we care if somebody comes along and tells us that the folk tales are like this sort of pillar of German culture in a way, right? The Grimms, nobody's on German money nowadays because it's all euros, and nobody's on the euros. But the Grimms were on German money back when they had their own money. I think it was the 500 mark note. So if somebody comes along and says that the German folk tales, the Grimm's collection, aren't real or aren't authentic, I mean, again, do we care about that? Or if we're Germans? I mean, I don't know, I'm not German, but I think, or it's even worse if the tales are actually French. So, and again, it's not really a linguistic question. It has more to do with, literature or culture, of course, but in that case, we're being told not that the language is something invented to be functional, but that, culture isn't really as historical as we'd like to think. That modern Germans aren't, German, quote unquote, in the same way that medieval Germans were Germans. And of course, if you asked a medieval German, what are you? Like, as if you were in Chicago or something, they'd say, well, I'm a Saxon, or I'm a Bavarian, or even, better yet, a Nuremberger, or something like that. They might not say I'm a German. But, again, that's a little bit difficult to hear from moderns, right? So for Germans, the answer is, yeah, it does matter if somebody comes along and says that the Grimm's folktales aren't quite what we think they're supposed to be, namely authentic peasant folktales. So I guess the question is, what's our criteria for authenticity? And are we willing to tolerate, reproductions of old German folktales that cater to our own expectations of what an old German folktale is like, not what they actually were like, because we don't actually know what they were like, because nobody had tape recorders. So, first of all, I think, I guess we should define, now I think we all know what we talk about when I say Dothraki is kind of fake. But what is actually a folktale? When we say an authentic folktale, what is that? Well, okay, I mean, it can be a lot of different things, right? It can be an anecdote, a joke, legends, myths, fables, and this excludes a lot of what we might call, internet folklore, in that, it's composed anonymously, supposedly, it's collective, improvisational authorship, it's formulaic, and it's transmitted orally. That's kind of what nowadays, of course, doesn't work anymore if we're going to talk about contemporary folklore. But, this is sort of the gold standard of what authentic folklore is supposed to be. And when it comes to fairy tales, that's another kind of thorny problem, is whether fairy tales ever actually, a peasant thing, right? Because folk tales are supposed to come from the folk, right? From the people, from the peasants, namely. And, when it comes to fairy tales, there's a controversy as to whether this is something that Renaissance Italy invented, because Renaissance Italy did kind of the first fairy tales. I mean, people have been telling jokes and anecdotes forever, but fairy tales, that's a particular kind of story. And it's first attested in Renaissance, with some authors in Renaissance Italy. So, and the argument goes, I'm not sure I buy it, but the argument goes that fairy tales were spread through print literature, you know, first within Italy, of course, migrated to France, and then into Germany, so that, you know, yes, they were so popular that they did spread among peasants, you know, sort of semi-literate, in a sort of semi-literate currency among peasants, but that, you know, these were not original. It's not original folk tales is the argument. Not sure I totally buy that, and we don't need to decide that today, but I thought I'd mention that there. So when it comes to the authenticity of the Grimm's tales, there are, again, several dimensions to consider. And first of all, as I said, fairy tales were very popular. I mean, just like today, everyone loves a fairy tale, right? And the problem for the Grimms is that at the time, we're talking the early 1800s, all educated Europeans were already familiar with the fairy tale genre. Just about everyone had grown up on the stories of, namely French authors, namely Charles Perrault, but Marie d'Aulnoy and a few others as well. And you know, if you stop someone today on the street, or if I were just to ask any of you, give me a fairy tale, you're likely, or you know, the person you talk to is likely to regurgitate, that's probably the wrong word, to give back a Disney plot. And you know, that's what they're likely to tell you. And it wasn't really any different in 1812. That is when, or in the early 1800s when the Grimms were working. But back then you'd get a plot from Perrault, Charles Perrault, or another French author. So if you're the Brothers Grimm and you want to collect authentic German folk tales, how do you do that? If everyone already knows French stories. You're dealing with, and the language is a little problematic, but you're dealing with, you know, sort of contaminated material here. You know, maybe though, if you went out into the countryside, you might find illiterate peasants who have their own folk tales or fairy tales untouched by the, you know, untouched by Perrault and other French authors. Namely, if we discount the theory about fairy tales being all Italian anyway. But the problem is that that's not what the Grimms did. When I was a kid, that's what I heard they did, but that's not what they did. The initial core of tales in 1812, the initial core of tales they brought together and published in the first volume were retellings from basically a circle of middle-class young women that they hung around with, and Wilhelm actually ended up marrying one of them, Dorothea Wild, or Dorothea Grimm née Wild, who, oh, I guess we can, actually I tend to forget my PowerPoint. There she is, Dorothea Grimm. One of the sources of the fairy tales, and it's kind of funny, they'll say in the notes, we collected this story in Hessen. So yeah, you did, you got it from your wife, you know, or your future wife at least. So, you know, they were a little bit vague, a little dodgy about that, but, oh, where am I? So there's that problem, but the second volume, and we'll be coming up on the anniversary of the second volume, the 200-year anniversary next year, 2015. By that point, they kind of got a clue. In 1812, when they first published the first volume, I get the feeling they didn't quite know what they were doing. But by 1815, they kind of got a clue, and they looked up not just this lady here. This is Fiemann, Dorothea Fiemann, who definitely had more working class credibility than the relatively privileged teenagers like Dorothea Grimm. But you know, she had more work. She was the daughter of an innkeeper, but she was still literate. It wasn't like and the gold standard for collecting folk tales is really, you know, an illiterate peasant, because it's supposed to be oral culture. So, but anyway, she was probably better than what they had. So, and she was really the